In the last video, we discussed exporting audio and MIDI from arrangement view in depth. There are some differences and limitations in session view, so let's take a closer look. So I've got exercise 2 from chapter 13 open, and if you find yourself in arrangement view, hit your tab key so that we can move over to session view. And it's a good idea when you start this process to just hit your stop all clips button so that in the end you don't get anything extra that you weren't intending to render. Now, I'll start off by mentioning that exporting a MIDI file is exactly the same as it is in arrangement view. So you can select a clip like I have here on the sine bass track, right-click on it, and choose Export MIDI Clip from the contextual menu. It'll take the name of the file from the track that you're exporting from, and if you want to change that, you can add something onto that like I'm going to do here, or you can just accept that and then set your save point, in this case to the desktop, and I'll click Save. And let's flip over to the Finder window, and you can see that I've got that MIDI file there. Now, just to show you that we got exactly the same thing that we had here on the track, I'm going to drag that back and import it back into the live set and drop it on the next clip slot. So here's the original, and here's the one that we just exported. So exactly the same thing. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so exporting audio is quite different in session view than it is from arrangement view, and there are some limitations. Essentially, we can export clips from tracks, or we can export entire scenes. So in this case, let's export this same clip that we just exported the MIDI from. Now, all of your clips are stopped and nothing has got focus. I'll mention that you need to have a clip in focus before you can export it. So you'll likely need to go and hit a launch button and then stop it so that the launch button is showing in that focused or green state. Now, once you've done that, we need to go up to the File menu and we'll choose Export Audio. And from here, we can make the same kind of choices that we were doing. I can export from the master if I was doing maybe a whole scene, or if I wanted to do something like the drum sub, I could do that, and I could export all of these clips from the drum sub at one point. But in this case, the only clip that has focus is on the sine bass track. So I'm going to choose that. And the render start doesn't have really anything to do with this here. But what is important is the render length. We can see down here in the clip overview that this is 8 measures long. And so it's defaulted to that as the render length. But if I only wanted to do a portion of that, I could type in a 4, for example. Or if I wanted to get this twice, I could type in a 16. The other options that we see here are the same as what we talked about in the last video. So for this particular example, I'm not going to include the return or master effects. I don't care to render this as a loop, but I do want it to be mono. Yeah, I'll go ahead and normalize it, and then I'm going to leave the sample rate and the other file options at the same thing. So I'll go ahead and click Export. Now, it's bringing up the last name I typed in there. That's why we see that. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll go ahead and click Save. Again, if I flip over to the Finder window here, I can see that I now have an audio file, an AIF file to be exact, of the same thing that we did with the MIDI file. Now, the other thing that we can do, as I mentioned, is we can export an entire scene. So let me stop that sine bass from playing, and I'll play the bridge scene here. All right, so now all of those clips are in focus, and I'll go back to the File menu. I'll choose Export Audio and Video. This time I'm going to reset this to the master. And again, I need to set the render length. Now this clip is actually 5 measures long, or this portion of the song. So I'll go ahead and type that in. And then this time I don't need to include the return and master because I'm actually coming through the master, and I'm going to get all of these in whatever return effects are happening. I don't want to render this as a loop. I don't want this in mono, so I'll disable that. Normalizing is fine. And then again, I'll leave the file type settings the same as we discussed in the last video. Oh, and I'll add an MP3 to this just for the fun of it. So I'll go ahead and click on, and now I can click export. And we'll call this bridge scene. Doesn't take too long because it's just 5 measures. And if I flip over, we can see that we now have a .aif file and an MP3 file for that scene. So if you want to export an entire project, you'll need to do it from Arrangement View. But if you prefer working in Session View, you can export clips and scenes if needed.